For almost 30 years, every serious racer knew one thing for certain. A four-stroke could not win a motocross race. They were heavy, they were slow to respond, and they belonged in the woods. Then on May 17, 1997, at the Las Vegas Supercross finale, a rider with a surgically rebuilt back lined up on a four-stroke Yamaha that most of the paddock had written off as a science experiment, ran at the front all night, and beat the best two-stroke riders in the world. It was the first four-stroke victory in AMA history, and it broke a belief the entire sport had been built on. It is a story of two underdogs at once, the machine almost nobody believed in and the broken man riding it. Start with why four-strokes had been a joke on a racetrack, because the reason was never top-end power. It was throttle response. A big single sucks in a huge gulp of air, and when you snap the throttle open, it needs fuel that same instant, or the mixture goes lean and the engine bogs. Worse, it can flame out completely, coughing dead right as you load the front wheel for a jump face or drive out of a berm. Privateers had spent thousands trying to turn Honda XRs and Kawasaki KLXs into motocrossers, and they mostly ended up with overheating boat anchors. The European exotics from Husaberg and VOR were lighter but fragile and priced out of reach. Nobody had built a four-stroke that could respond like a two-stroke and survive a full moto, and that wall is why the class belonged to the two-stroke smokers. Yamaha broke through it almost by accident. The engineers handed the project were two-stroke road race specialists who had never designed a four-stroke or a motocross bike in their lives. Their first attempt dropped a TT250R trail motor into a YZ400F chassis, and it was hopelessly heavy and slow, a dead end. They were stuck until one engineer, Kenji Tamura, took the cylinder head and camshafts off a YZF750 superbike, sawed away everything but a single cylinder's worth, and welded that road race head onto a dirt bike cylinder with putty filling the gaps. The Frankenstein motor fired and revved like the sport bike it came from. That is the actual moment the modern four-stroke motocrosser was born, in a high-revving five-valve head lifted straight off a road racer rather than dug out of a trail bike. Nobody outside the factory believed it was real. The project leader brought a prototype to the United States and later admitted the trip was less a test than a sales pitch, because the more a rider knew about motocross, the more certain he was the thing would ride like an old air-cooled TT500 thumper. Then they let people lap it. The French legend Stéphane Peter Hansel pulled off his helmet and shouted that it was a surprise, and the disbelief cracked. The works racer that won Vegas was a pure exotic, a hand-built frame wrapped around a billet engine with a carbon fiber subframe, an aluminum tank, and a titanium exhaust. The affordable version arrived shockingly fast. Yamaha unveiled the production YZ400F in June 1997, only months after the works bike's racing debut, and put it on showroom floors as a 1998 model, a turnaround from one-off to dealer floor that was almost unheard of. The single part that finally beat the throttle response wall was the carburetor. The YZ400F was the first dirt bike ever to ship with a Keihin FCR, a 39mm flat slide carb pulled from road racing. A flat slide opens a clean, instant path for air, and the FCR's accelerator pump squirts a shot of raw fuel the moment you crack the throttle, covering the lean spot that used to kill these engines stone dead. That one component is most of the reason the bike was raceable instead of merely rideable. It gave a four-stroke the instant bark off the bottom that riders had only felt from a two-stroke, without the constant jetting fuss that plagued earlier thumpers. Underneath sat a 399 liquid-cooled single with double overhead cams and a five-valve head, 3 intakes, and 2 exhausts. 5 small valves flow more air than 2 big ones while staying light enough to chase high RPM without floating, and that is how a single that size spun to 11,600 RPM and made power and torque on par with a 252-stroke. Yamaha called the design language Genesis, and it came from their FZ and YZF street bikes, not from any utility motor. The whole engine was packaged on purpose to sit close to the dimensions of a YZ252-stroke, so it could slot into a familiar chassis and turn like a real motocross bike instead of plowing like a tractor. Here is the part riders still argue about in the pits. The AMA let four-strokes run up to 550 cubic centimeters against 252 strokes in the Premier class, so Yamaha could have built something far bigger. They chose not to. A two-stroke fires every revolution and makes roughly 1.6 times the power per cubic centimeter of a four-stroke, so to match a 252 strokes output, you need about 400 cubic centimeters. Run the math, and 250 times 1.6 lands right on 400. A 550 would have made more peak power, but carried too much weight to be worth it, so 400 cubic centimeters was the sweet spot of power against mass. Even there, the production bike weighed close to 250 pounds, while the YZ252 stroke it lined up against came in around 218. That 30-pound gap was real, and it did not go unnoticed. Plenty of sharp people thought the arrangement was unfair. Roger DeCoster argued the four-stroke displacement should be capped far lower. Kawasaki's race boss wanted a flat rule, 250 against 250 regardless of engine type, and on those terms the two-stroke wins going away. The numbers prove his point, because a 252-stroke makes around 46 horsepower to a 254-stroke's 36, and close to 50% more torque. The 4-stroke only conquered the premier class because the rulebook let it be a third bigger than its rivals. Both things are true at the same time. The YZ400F was a real engineering leap, and it was handed a displacement advantage, and any honest account has to hold both. The weight bought something genuine on the dirt, though. 4-stroke power comes on smoother and pulls longer, so the rear tire hooks up and drives forward where a 252-stroke would light up and spin sideways. On slick, blue groove hardpack, that traction is free lap time, letting riders carry corner speed they could never hold on a pingy 2-stroke. The engine also slows the bike for you. Roll off the throttle and the high compression and valve train drag haul you down on their own, so you drag less brake into a corner and the chassis stays settled on entry, where a 2-stroke just coasts and leaves all the slowing to your right hand. 2-stroke riders had to relearn their braking markers from scratch. It was not magic everywhere. The mass punished you in deep sand and big whoops. A mistimed landing met you with a hard metal clank. Because all that weight has to go somewhere, the early bikes were a pain to start when hot, and the stock fork was soft for the heft, so the fast guys went straight to stiffer springs front and rear. There was a hidden cost, too, one that hit the local racer harder than the factory star. A 2-stroke top end is a bench job you can knock out in an evening with a fresh piston, a ring, and a fresh batch of premix. A 4-stroke means valves, shims, cams, and a clearance check, and when something lets go, it lets go expensive. The YZ400F started a shift in the economics of racing that the privateer paddock would feel for years, and it is part of why the 4-stroke boom eventually cooled by the end of the decade as owners did the math on rebuild bills. His story is why this bike is a legend instead of a footnote. 2 years before Vegas at the 1995 Budds Creek National, Doug Henry slipped off the back of his Honda on the face of the track's steepest downhill, pinned the throttle by accident, and launched nearly 80 feet through the air onto flat ground. He broke his back. He kept the use of his legs, but everyone assumed his career was finished, and Honda declined to re-sign him while he was still in rehab. Yamaha gambled on the hobbled privateer instead. He came back in 1996, getting lapped in the early rounds, clawed his way to a moto win by season's end, and for 1997, Yamaha asked him to race their secret 4-stroke prototype. That same Works 400 also ran the 500 cubic centimeter World Motocross Championship in Europe that year, where the rules gave 4 strokes no displacement brake and it went straight up against full 500 cubic centimeter 2-strokes, winning motos there too. Then the sport showed how cruel it can be. 1 month after making history in Las Vegas, Henry was back at Budds Creek, a few feet from the same jump that had broken his back, and he crashed again, this time snapping both arms. He walked over to the fans at the fence and asked them to undo his helmet strap, because he could not move his hands to do it himself. The downhill where it happened is still called Henry Hill today. Either crash would have finished most riders. He kept going. In 1998, Yamaha put the production YZ400F under him, and he became the first rider in history to contest a full premier season on a 4-stroke. The Supercross series was solid but winless, a 7th overall. The outdoors were where the bike and the rider finally made their case. Henry won at Southwick, his home track, then won at Budds Creek itself, the same dirt that had broken his back and both of his arms in front of a crowd that knew exactly what they were watching. He beat a field stacked with champions Jeff Emig, Jeremy McGrath, Ezra Lusk, Kevin Windham, Michael Pichon, and Greg Albertin, racked up 5 overall wins and clinched the 1998 AMA 250 National Motocross Championship with a full round still to spare. It was the first national title ever won on a 4-stroke, and the AMA named him Professional Athlete of the Year. The thing the whole industry knew to be impossible had just been done by a man who should not have been walking. That championship is what flipped the sport, but the 2-stroke did not die overnight. For about 4 years, the 4-stroke game stayed Yamaha's private playground because none of the other big manufacturers had a premier 4-stroke to answer with. Yamaha grew the bike to 426 cubic centimeters in 2000 for more power and easier starting, added titanium valves and a smaller YZ400F in 2001, and pushed it out to the 449 cubic centimeter YZ450F in 2003 as the AMA finally tightened the rule to 450 against 250. Honda's CRF 450R landed in 2002 and dragged the movement mainstream. Suzuki's RMZ 450 followed in 2005, and Kawasaki's KX450F in 2006. By the middle of that decade, the 250 cubic centimeters 2-stroke had been pushed out of the premier classes of AMA Supercross and Motocross completely. The strangest part is that none of it was new. Motocross was born on 4-stroke singles in the 1950s and 60s on AJS, Matchless, and Norton machines. until the two-stroke swept them all away by making more power for far less weight. The four-stroke only clawed its way back by being handed the cubic centimeters the two-stroke was never allowed. And within a decade of that night in Las Vegas, the bike everyone had called a trail toy had taken the two-stroke's place at the front of the sport the two-stroke had once taken for itself.